This year, the average human being will take 20 photographs every day. Worldwide, that's 1.9 trillion photos. Our lives are so full of photography that there seems to be nothing extraordinary about it. But there was a time when a photograph was borderline miraculous, when Edgar Allan Poe described photography as the most important and perhaps the most extraordinary triumph of modern science. Credit for taking the first photograph goes to Joseph Nicephore Niepce. In 1826, he coated a pewter sheet with a light-sensitive material and loaded it into a primitive camera. He then aimed it out his window and exposed the sheet for several days, then applied a solvent that dissolved the coating in proportion to how much light it was exposed to. This was the result. Years later, an Englishman named William Talbot developed his own photographic process to capture the image of a window in an abbey. He used a process called calotype, which had the capability of making multiple prints of an image. These are some of his earliest images, taken in the 1840s. But calotypes lack the definition of daguerreotypes, which were developed by Louis Daguerre. This 1837 photo of his studio window shows how far he'd advanced photographic contrast and detail. In 1839, he took this picture of a street in Ghent, Belgium. In 1838, he took one particularly memorable picture. The scene is the Boulevard du Temple, a busy street in Paris. But all the pedestrians and traffic are moving too quickly to be captured by his camera's 6 minutes of exposure. So the street appears empty, except for one figure standing still, getting his boots shined. The first photograph of a human being. In 1839, the French government acquired the right to Daguerre's process and gave it away free to the world. One of the people who eagerly took up Daguerre's method was Joseph Saxton of Philadelphia. In September of 1839, he used a cigar box camera and a crude lens to take what is arguably the first photograph in the United States, a picture of the city's Central High School. Encouraged by the results, Saxton looked for someone who could provide more photosensitive plates. He asked Robert Cornelius, who made elaborate fixtures for the gas lighting then being installed in homes. Cornelius was interested by Saxton's results and soon built his own daguerreotype equipment. In October, he stepped out the back door of his shop and took this image of himself. It has long been thought the earliest photo of a human face and the first selfie. The next year, he opened a photo studio and advertised in the city papers. Several of his portraits survive, including this photo of the Philadelphia street outside his studio at 8th and Market. Cornelius eventually closed down his studio and grew old making ornate gas lighting fixtures. Though his self-portrait was long considered the first photo of a human face, researchers have uncovered this photo of Monsieur Constant Huet, presumably taken by Louis Daguerre in 1837, which would make this the earliest photo of a person. The first photograph of a woman was taken in 1840. Artist, educator, and chemist Dorothy Catherine Draper was photographed in upstate New York. The earliest born person photographed is Hannah Stilley Gorby, who had her picture taken in 1839 when she was 94 years old. She was born in 1746, 30 years before America became an independent country. The earliest photo of a president was created in 1843. John Quincy Adams had been out of the White House for 14 years when he was talked into sitting for his daguerreotype portrait. He declared the result hideous, but he agreed to sit for another portrait in 1850. The first president to have his picture taken while in office was James Polk, photographed by Matthew Brady in 1849. The first photograph of the White House was taken in 1846, shortly after Polk's election. Andrew Jackson had several photos taken late in life. He sat for a portrait with Matthew Brady in 1844. Brady photographed him again in 1845, shortly before Jackson died. He complained that Brady made him look like a monkey. The following year, photographer Nicholas Shepard took a picture of a future president, who at the time was still an Illinois lawyer. When these early photos were taken, the photographer couldn't know they were the first images of their kind, so there's no way for us to be sure. We can only give our best guess at the earliest photo of some subjects. This is the earliest photo we found of enslaved people in America, working on a Georgia farm in the 1850s. The first photograph of a Native American may be this 1847 image of Chief Keokuk, leader of the Sauk Indians. Soldiers were photographed for the first time in 1847 at Calle Real, Mexico. This is General Wool and his staff of the U.S. Army during the Mexican-American War. Also from that year was a photograph of the grave of Colonel Henry Clay, Jr., who died in the Battle of Buena Vista. In what could be considered the earliest example of photojournalism, this picture shows barricades in Paris streets erected during the July Revolution of 1848. An engraving was made from this photo for the newspapers. The oldest photograph of New York City is this daguerreotype taken in 1848, showing a house and farm on Bloomingdale Road, now called Broadway. The oldest photo of a city that looks like a city is this panorama of Cincinnati, an 1848 image comprised of 8 sequential daguerreotypes. The first photograph of a dog is reported to be this image from 1846. One of the earliest aerial photographs was taken from a hot air balloon 2,000 feet over Boston in 1860. The first known photograph of a tornado was taken from 14 miles away on April 23, 1884, near Central City, Kansas. We also have some of the earliest photographs of baseball games. The earliest, we believe, is from Connecticut in 1869. The other shows a game somewhere in California around the same time. The French photographer Louis Ducos du Aron worked on several methods for producing color photographs. One of the results was this photo of southern France, taken in 1877. Finally, we should acknowledge the photographic subjects who broke new ground along with the photographers, the people who smiled for the camera. It's not easy to hold a grin steady up to 90 seconds, which was the exposure time for a daguerreotype. And in the Victorian era, smiling was considered a sign of foolishness. It reflected a lack of seriousness. You didn't want the photo that would outlive you to show you with a thoughtless grin. Besides, a smile is transitory. It's not how our faces look most of the time. But some people wanted to be remembered that way, to look more like the people who make us smile. Saturday Evening Post members can explore our 200-year-old archive for only $15 a year. Subscribe today.